Hello, everyone. Welcome back to St. Louis Teens. We are here today with Professor Turner, who is the Harry and Norman Chandler Professor of Communication at Stanford University and is the author of several books. Professor Turner is an expert on media technology and cultural change with focus on the ways that emerging media have helped shape American life since World War II. Professor Turner, your recent book, Seeing Silicon Valley Life Inside of Fraying America, is a powerful glimpse of what might be the future of our country and is an inspiration for new civic visions. Thank you so much for your phenomenal work, and thank you so much for being here with us today.
Well, thank you, Shri. I'm absolutely delighted to be here. Thanks.
Professor Turner, thank you so much. Can you tell us more about what drove you to the field of communication and journalism, and what has been the most favorite part of your journey so far?
Sure. So I fell into journalism by accident. I went to college as an undergraduate. I was a writer. I wrote a book of poems as my senior thesis. I went straight to graduate school because it seemed like I liked school. I should just stay there. And I hated it. I hated it with a passion. And I had a fancy fellowship, and I was going to study English. And I basically lasted a year, got a master's degree, and ran away to Berlin. And in Berlin, Germany, in 1985, 86, when the wall was still up, I started working in a theater, and I started writing reviews of the rock acts that would come through our theater. I started writing them for this English language magazine. When I came back to the States after a while, a friend of mine said, "Hey, we need a theater critic at my weekly business paper. Any chance you can write about theater?" And I said, "Well, sure." And he said, "Have you ever written anything?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I wrote this stuff in Berlin." And that literally started me on a 10-year run as a journalist. And so I was a journalist for 10 years. I loved it. I did a lot of cultural reporting. And I gradually got tired, though, and frustrated because I kept doing these like short pieces. And I knew that the stories I wanted to cover were happening sort of lower and slower. And remember, this is pre-digital, this is pre-internet. So I'm writing for newspapers, all weeklies. And I just realized I want to write books. So I slowed down, I started writing books, and the rest is, joking history. Yeah. And I'll say one more thing. I think that, media are to our lives the way that buildings are to the lives of people who live in cities. We don't think a lot about them, but they totally shape how we behave, who we interact with, how we do things. And so I think we need to study that, and I'm just excited to do it.
And Professor Turner, you talk about the ways in which we can leverage the tools of media for the betterment of our society. And from your experience, what are some of the unique and innovative ways we can use emerging media now for civic purposes?
Well, I think the first is actually for reverse surveillance. I think when we look at Black Lives Matter, we look at the death of George Floyd. One of the things that we see is um, cameras, cell phones used to surveil people in power, and I think that's really important. I think another thing we can do is use those cameras, as we've tried to do in our book Seeing Silicon Valley, to surface images of the people that we don't see. If I were a teenager right now, I think I would be making images of my brothers and sisters, my family, my friends, and helping folks to see those. I think that's enormously important. You may never know that someone my age, I'm 60. Someone my age actually doesn't know what teenagers do these days. Like I have no idea, and I would love to have access to those kinds of images, get to see those kinds of folks. So I think surveilling people in power, looking up, and then making images of the people around you so that other folks can see that. Really important. Last thought, I remember the 1930s, not personally, but I remember them as an idea. The 1930s was a time when America was similarly conflicted as it is now. And one of the things that the government did then was they funded photographers to go around the country and make pictures of the poor. And suddenly people could actually see what poverty looked like in America. I think we need to be doing that kind of work now. And we live in an era where we all have cell phones and we can all do that work. So I encourage you and your colleagues to get out there and do it.
And I think that's such a great sort of idea, especially to be able to get out the stories now, to be able to portray things that might not have a light shed on them. And I'd like to ask Professor Turner, can you share with us the stories of inspiring media entrepreneurs and startups that employ that civic purpose whom you have seen and worked with?
Sure. What's really interesting about that question is that I haven't actually seen very many civically oriented entrepreneurs. So I was involved at Google when Google News was getting underway, and I think inside Google News, folks were very interested in being better news providers. And you know the famous Google slogan, "Don't be evil." Well, inside Google, what starts to happen is people say, well, okay, so what's good? Well, giving people information is good. Who gives people information? Well, we do, Google. So suddenly what's good for the world and what's good for Google start to get tangled up. So I've seen a lot of that kind of logic. I live in Silicon Valley. I'd live 2 miles from Google's headquarters. So I see that. What I also see, though, that does cheer me up is the work of someone like Cheryl Phillips. Her name is spelled Cheryl, but it's pronounced Cheryl. Cheryl Phillips has worked with a whole slew of students to produce a kind of digital database for tracking police behavior across the country.
Oh, wow.
And this is really powerful. He's training students in how to do database journalism, database digging, and then to monitor police forces statistically so that you can actually see, maybe George Floyd isn't an aberration, or maybe he is, but you can actually see the context in which that's happening. And I think that's very powerful. And I think, for instance, in St. Louis, she would be able to map police behavior in different neighborhoods. I think that's a very powerful citizen-oriented project.
I think one of the big things that sort of brings about is that idea of a communications revolution. And in your essay, Machine Politics, you quote President Reagan's statement, the communications revolution will be the greatest force for the advancement of human freedom that the world has ever seen. Where
Mm-hmm.
do you think we are now in this communications revolution, and where do you envision we could be?
Oh, I only wish Ronald Reagan were right in 1989. I don't think he was. I think we're in a very complicated place. On the one hand, we have lived for the last several decades through a kind of mediatization of everyday life that has made it possible for us to see all kinds of differences. Taboos are falling away like crazy. One story that means a lot to me is, when I was a kid in eighth grade, if you were a gay boy, you were absolutely the target of bullying, and you certainly would never talk about it or be out. Okay, fast forward now 25 years to my daughter graduating from eighth grade at the local middle school, and her best friend announces, she's a valedictorian in eighth grade, announces to everyone that she's gay, and 2,000 adults. And not everyone was thrilled, but it's an incredible moment. So I see something like the transformation of our understanding of gay life and of gay marriage in particular as a product of media. Media are making it possible for us to see lots of different kinds of people that we've never seen before, and also to embrace them, to recognize that they are people like us. All right, flip side. The flip side is that particular media structures, notably social media, have an incentive to get us to say very controversial things to keep us online. And that kind of accelerated controversy has terrible effect for our democracy. And I think we see that as well. So I don't think it's a purely good phenomenon. I think it's a mix.
One of the things that you hit on that was really important then is being able to shine a light and being able to spread a positive message about individuals that may not have had that opportunity before. And one of those groups, especially very marginalized, is unhoused or individuals who are facing homelessness. And with my project helping those facing homelessness start their own businesses, I met people from various skills of life, a teacher, a business owner, a salesperson, all of them facing homelessness right here in St. Louis. And
Mm-hmm.
you have a very similar experience in your book, Seeing Silicon Valley, Life Inside of Fraying America. You talk about similar but unexpected stories from Silicon Valley, for instance, the life of a Stanford student working in tech and facing homelessness. And you point out that despite the technological advancements and the wealth that we've built, we fail to provide the basic needs of our struggling neighbors, even in our richest communities. Professor Turner, what are some of those steps that you propose we can take now to be on that path to equity?
Right. What a great question. Thank you for asking that. The first step is to simply acknowledge that a lot of what we've been told about technology and its likely benevolent social effects is mythology and advertising. You know, if you're working here in Silicon Valley and you own a tech company and you can convince regulators in Washington that, oh, I'm making the future and you just need to let me connect everyone with my servers. And yes, I'll have to monitor them a little bit, but by doing that, I'll be able to get, everybody conversing. And, as Mark Zuckerberg likes to say, everyone will be able to be sort of in contact with each other. And that will itself change society. That's nonsense. And that's a deeply self-serving view because it creates a world in which all of that activity generates profits for Mark Zuckerberg. What we need to do is begin to reimagine business as a system that serves the world as a whole, not simply shareholders, not simply owners. And one of the things you see in Silicon Valley that will blow your mind is that there's robust inequality here. Profits accrue to the top, but then don't take care of the bottom. Just to give you a brief example of this, we have half the world's billionaires in this region. There's at least 74 billionaires currently in the region, with a B, billionaires. During the pandemic, 40%, 4 in 10 households in our region were food insecure. They did not have enough to eat. We have tremendous homelessness here. Stanford University, where, I mean, you can see in the background here, that's where I am. Stanford University, around the edge of campus are cars in which people live, trailers in which people live, and many of those folks have jobs. So how do we fix this? Well, a few different ways. The key word, I think, in every case is redistribution. We have got to find a way to redistribute the wealth. And that's going to have a governmental component. I think the state is going to have to step in because the state is the only representative of the people that I know. Second, it's going to have an ideological component. We who make tech, we who study tech, we who want to be a part of that industry need to see that just building that industry is not enough to make the world a better place. You have to build that industry and take the profits that you make from it and put them back into the communities that sustain you. And I think that's it. It's got to have a practical side and an ideological side. With homelessness particularly, that's something I am truly stumped by. I have a relative who is homeless, and it's extraordinarily painful, and I don't know how to help him. And it's I do not have a kind of local on the ground solution. I wish I did.
And I think you talked about one of the stories there that's very personal to you. I'd like to ask, of the 26 residents of Silicon Valley that you showcase in your book, if you were to pick one that had the greatest impact on you, who would
Mhm.
that be and why?
Sure. Um, I have a. I don't know that it's quite one, but I'll go with. I'll show you one. We'll start here. So this is the book, Seeing Silicon Valley, and this is Cristobal. I'll see if I can get the picture right. I got to get the right distance here. Well, we're not going to worry about it. So Cristobal is an Army veteran. He's a single man. He's a full-time worker as a security guard at Facebook. Now, Facebook employs contract workers, so he doesn't work directly for Facebook, but he works full-time at Facebook. And he makes about $20 an hour, which in any part of this country should be a good wage. But he can't afford to live here, at least not in a house. My colleague, Mary Beth Meehan, who met Cristobal and made the pictures in the book, she went to visit Cristobal to take a picture, and she pulled up in front of a house, and she thought, oh, great, he lives here. He came out to meet her, and then he took her around back. And when he took her around back, he took her to where he really lived, which was the garden shed. Without electricity, without plumbing, the garden shed. We live in a country where no one should have to live in the garden shed, especially when they are working for one of the most wealthy companies in the universe. That is reprehensible, especially when they've served our country as soldiers. That is reprehensible. So what struck me about Cristobal was that his dignity, he had not lost his dignity. He still worked really hard despite a situation that was extraordinarily unfair. And that's something that I see in a number of the people in the book. They don't lose their dignity. They hang on to their dignity. They are still full human beings, even as they are working inside a system that is radically unfair.
And I think one of the big points that you bring up is dignity. And it's so incredible to see. And I think it's especially inspirational to see from a perspective from the outside to say these individuals really are in the situation to really put themselves out there and to continue their work. And I think Cristobal and every other individual that you discuss in Seeing Silicon Valley is absolutely inspirational.
Well, that's great. Thank you. You know, one of the things that's been interesting to me about the people in the book is how often they're balancing two forces, right, inside themselves. They're anxious, they're nervous, they're hustling, they're trying to make it in a very precarious world, but they're also hopeful and they have families and they're kind to one another. And my hope for the book is that, my fellow residents will see that we are part of a community. We are not just part of a startup system. We are part of a community, a world, and we owe it to one another to take good care of each other.
And I want to talk about your vision there with the book. During your work with the book and outside, can you share with us some of the instances where Silicon Valley and tech giants have taken the steps that you envision to provide solutions for our problems? And how can we grow and continue to strengthen these solutions as well?
Yeah, unfortunately, the tech companies have been relatively slow to take the kinds of steps that I would like to see. They have made efforts to reach out to working class workers in East Palo Alto, which is an area that's underserved. They have done some limited studies of racism inside the company, but they continue to underemploy women and they continue to treat them badly when they're there. And they really haven't done the kinds of things that they need to do to support the whole community. You know, Mark Zuckerberg gives quite a lot of money to philanthropy at a personal level, but Facebook has only started a very modest housing program in Menlo Park, so far as I know, which is where they're headquartered. And you know, much of the valley remains troubled. I haven't seen anyone from any tech firm reaching out to the 40% of families who don't have enough to eat in this region. And I think that's just terrible. So I haven't seen that. I wish I had. I would like to see it. What I do see is communities inside these companies taking action. So there's something called the Tech Work Coalition, which is a group of tech workers, a lot of engineers and others here in the Valley, very active in trying to improve the work lives of technical people and in getting companies oriented toward other kinds of questions. They would be one of my favorites. Silicon Valley Rising is another group that's very active in that way. So there's a couple.
And Professor Turner, I'd like to transition now and ask, what is your advice for teens and youth, and how can we be social leaders and be agents of change just like yourself?
Well, thank you. That's great. I don't know if I'm an agent of change. I'll try to be, but I think that I think the first thing. So first of all, I'm really glad that you're asking the question, and I just think that's wonderful in its own right. You know, I just think that's great. I think that for young people, as for old people, the real question is, as they used to say in old blues songs, who you gonna serve? Who you gonna serve? Right? Who you gonna serve? And the challenge is, who do you want to serve? What do you value? How do you live in accord with your values? One of the things that I have learned over the years, you know, so I've had different jobs in my life. I've told you the journalism and professoring stuff. I haven't told you about working offshore. I haven't told you about being a 7-Eleven counter guy for a long time. So I have other parts to my life. And I mentioned those because one of the things that I learned in the bounce around parts of my life was that you can make a difference anywhere you are. There is no special way. You don't have to get to Stanford to make a difference. You truly don't. But what you do have to do is ask, what do I value? Who do I value? How do I help them? Try to be of service. Try to be of use. And the ways will just manifest. Some of them might be technical. Some of them might be social. Might be just visiting an older friend. You know, there's a lot you can do. That service orientation, I think that's the key.
Professor Turner, thank you so much for your leadership and amazing service. And thank you so much for your time today and answering all of our questions.
Oh, Shri, thank you. And I wish you all very good luck in St. Louis.